All right, welcome back, everybody, to Culz Interviews. Today we have a pretty exciting guest for us, at least. We've been looking for this one. Mr. Arlan will be joining us tonight, and we'll turn it over to him because if you look at his credentials, I mean, he's had some really cool experiences, and I'll let you, Arlan, talk to the audience a little bit more on that because obviously you lived it, so you know what you did a little bit better than I do. But I'll turn it over to you, and thank you for joining us.
Okay, well, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it. And thank Mark Eddy for making the introduction for us. I'm Arlan Andrews. Credentials, I've got a doctorate in mechanical engineering that I've had a long time. My first job was as a missile tracker at White Sands Missile Range as a co-op student, 1958, if you could believe it, a long time ago. And when I worked at White Sands, those guys said in the old days when the flying saucers were the big thing in the early 50s, the trackers that I worked with, we used tracking telescopes. They had orders that if a flying saucer or UFO of any kind came over, they were to drop whatever they were tracking and switch to that. But nobody ever did that they could find. Nothing like that ever really happened. A couple of incidences when I was tracking with friends, we had some strange things fly by that I identified on the shoot report as UFO, but we never found out what it was. We were looking at a stationary target and something flew by at 5,000 miles an hour, and we never figured out what it was. But it's out there. It was on film. Let's see. Over the years, I worked at White Sands, got my degrees. I worked on the anti-ballistic missile system, the Sprint and Spartan missiles. You can look those up. Those are very cool. Worked out of North Carolina. After a while, I worked at Sandia National Laboratories, the nuclear people up in Albuquerque, and worked on those kind of big boom things. I got an assignment to work in Washington, D.C. for a couple of years, worked for the Technology Administration of the U.S. Department of Commerce, looked at all kind of neat things like nanotechnology and 3D printing and those things in virtual reality. Helped to start a virtual reality company based on some other people's software, a company called Muse, M-U-S-E, went to NASDAQ for a while, made millions and lost it all. The dot-com crash was not good for anybody. Let's see, what else did I do? Well, let's see, I was on the board of directors at Ryan Research Institute down in Durham, North Carolina. Those are people who looked into life after death research and paranormal and psychic stuff. Myself, the engineering has been the career and the way I paid the bills and had a family over the years. My real interest has always been in the esoteric and the paranormal. I had a grandmother who told me all these. She claimed that they were American Indians, and so she told me all these weird tales about ghosts, haints, strange things in the sky, precognition, life after death, astrology. She told me all that stuff. So I was interested in it from the time I was a little kid. So I knew there was no way to make a living at that, at the time at least. But I thought, well, if I became a credential engineer, I could do that as a business and use some of those skills to look into what Charles Fort called the dark corners. The bright lights shine around, everybody makes careers and Nobel Prizes off of that, but some people need to look in the dark corners over here. What's that little thing crawling around in the dark corner that nobody looks at? Well, I want to shine a light on it. Sometimes you look in those dark corners, it's very interesting, and sometimes it's plumb scary. But you can make advances by looking at anomalies. So I've always been interested in anomalies, strange things. When I was 10 years old, I saw an object, and this is in rural Arkansas. I was talking to the preacher and my mother in our front yard, and this thing, the size of the moon, apparent size of the moon, shot across the sky. It was round. And as a little kid, just coming from a revival meeting, I thought it was the end of the world. Scared everything out of me, really, literally. I guess it could have been a meteor, but boy, it was that big, shot across. So I've been a believer in weird things for a long time. I can't get into details because she doesn't want me to, but later on, I married a lady who, to whom all these things are almost everyday occurrences. I have had, over the years, I've had hundreds of experiences of precognition, poltergeist activity, Not many UFOs though. I'd like to see more of those, but we've done all kind of psychic research on Indian mounds and artifacts. On my own, I've gone to Stonehenge a couple times, gone to Saudi Arabia, gone to Peru a couple times, which is the basis of one of the books we'll talk about if you want, and to Mexico, all over New Mexico, all the weird places I could never afford to and had the time to go to. I've gone to. So it's been fun. So nowadays, I've been retired now the last time for 10 years now. All I do is write and read, and unfortunately spend too much time on YouTube looking at stuff like you guys and other people. There's so much on YouTube that blows my mind. I wish we'd had this 50 years ago. No, if we had, I'd never got anything done. But
I mean, I wish I was on YouTube like 10 years before I was, because I think it would have, like, if you hit it at the right moment. It's so diluted now. Like you said, there's so much on it. It's crazy.
well, yeah, one of my actually one of my very best friends is a fellow named Chris Dunn. You might have heard about. He wrote the Giza power plant, and he wrote the book Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt, which I wrote one of the introductions to. He's got another book coming up. In fact, you guys might want to have him on sometime. He's going to have another book out called Giza, the Tesla Connection, which is weird in many ways.
And
But
Tesla, like Nikola Tesla.
yeah, the Tesla
Yeah.
connection. Yeah, not the
we-
automobile, not Musk.
Yeah, no,
Nikola Tesla.
we actually did a whole episode trying to locate where his lab was in Colorado Springs, because now it's a neighborhood.
Yeah.
But using some of the landmarks, we were able to kind of pinpoint where it was. So that was, we love talking that in Egypt and all that.
So over the years, then, since I'm interested in weird stuff, naturally science fiction. I started reading science fiction when I was about 9 years old, and I've done it now for a long time. And along the way, I figured I could write some of it. I had neat ideas, I thought, so I wrote. I have not written very many books, but I've written a whole bunch of short stories. I've probably written 100 short stories over the years, the last 40 years, 45 years, and I've written articles in the UFO magazines. I had columns in the UFO magazine. I wrote paranormal stuff for a whole bunch of back in the 70s and 80s magazines and tabloids that no longer exist. But I wrote about a poltergeist investigation we did at the Soldiers and Airmen's Home in Washington, D.C., which was an official thing, and actually got some data on it, information, and tried to get the National Enquirer involved in it. They wanted to be, but that didn't work out. Over the years, I got to meet interesting people like Betty Hill. Interviewed her a couple times. In fact, one evening at her place, she had an excellent liquor closet, and I had entirely too much of it one night. I had to wind up crashing on her couch. That was back when I was single, back in the 70s. And let's see, got to meet Jacques Vallée and Dr. Hynek. Met him a couple times.
Yeah, Hynek, that's really cool. How was Hynek like when you met him?
Well, the first time I met him, he was giving a talk on balloon astronomy in Las Cruces, New Mexico. He was introduced as a professor from Northwestern University, and I didn't know he was the Air Force's UFO guy at that time, which is too bad because like 2 weeks before, we had, to me, a significant UFO incident in Las Cruces. And it was only by the merest of chances that I and a bunch of other corpsmen weren't there that night. At 3:30 in the morning, at a place called Three Crosses Hill on a golf course, some cops were driving by and they saw a green light, a pulsating light at the top, and they thought maybe a plane had crashed. So they climbed up this mesa about 20 feet. And there was a big object there, and it took off, dripping green flames. It shot over the mountains. I think this was September the 20th, 1960. Shot up over the mountains, and the next day, the reporter said White Sands people had seen it, and the Holloman Air Force Base public information officer said it was probably a meteorite. That was the moment when I read that I decided, these people are not telling the truth. I'm going to look into this stuff myself. A few weeks later, Dr. Hynek was in town, and I wish I had known. It was Dr. Tombaugh, Clyde Tombaugh, who was a friend. He introduced Dr. Hynek to all of us at the astronomy club, and he talked about balloon astronomy. He didn't talk about UFOs. So now that you think about it, maybe that wasn't a coincidence he was there. I don't know. I always wondered about that incident, and I got in touch with Glenn Greenwald last year, Black Vault guy, and he actually found a report of it from his Freedom of Information Act, and they were basically the same old nonsense. It said, well, it was probably a reentry of a Soviet space vehicle or something like that. Well, not on a golf course, not seen by two cops and a cab driver taking off over the mountain. I brought it up with a fellow who should have been in the know about it, but he wouldn't tell me any more about it. So who knows? But that's one of the hundreds of things that I read about, or thousands maybe by now, that convinced me that they are real. They're, most of them at least, are physical objects. I guess a guy named Ted Phillips years ago wrote about a book about, he collected 1,500 different cases of ground effects, of UFOs having effects on the ground or the environment. So last week when I watched the UFO hearings in NASA, they said, well, we're not going to go back and look at old grainy pictures of UFOs. We only want things that we can measure from now on. Well, wait a minute. Ted Phillips had 1,500 cases. Now, maybe some of them were not real, but if you go through all of those, some commonalities should arise that you can study. A guy named, I think, McCampbell wrote a book called Ufology back in 1976. At that time, he took every UFO case he could find, hundreds of them, and wrote down all the characteristics of every case. Some were weird and some were not. But when he got through that, there were a dozen various characteristics that showed up through all the reports. They were weighed 5 to 10 tons based on the ground effects. They had swirling lights around the edge. They landed in a falling leaf manner, and on and on. And they interfered, with electrical activity, cars, and electronics. So from that, he was able to say, okay, whatever they are, they all exhibit these same characteristics. And I was hoping that the government would at least go back, pick those things up and run with it. But no, they're starting from scratch. Well, better to start from scratch than not at all, but still it's a waste. So that's my end of my rant on UFOs. That's about as much as I know about it, other than what I've written about it in different magazines and encyclopedias. But
No, and you when we were talking before we started recording, you said obviously you're from Kentucky, or you're in Kentucky. I went to school at the Louisville Cardinals. My dad lived in Lawrenceburg, and I know it's just like a hot spot for those like stories and stuff like you were talking about that you heard when you were a kid. Like, do you hear a lot of it still today? Because I haven't been in Kentucky for a couple of years now, but
well, I come from Arkansas. I was born outside of Little Rock, Arkansas, out in the sticks, right out in the sticks. So I'm a country boy, basically. There's a book called Weird Kentucky. In fact, I'm sure you are probably aware of those books. Weird Kentucky, Weird Indiana.
yeah.
I want somebody to do one called Weird DC, and they can populate that one daily, But
Right.
yeah, there are the Goat Man under the trestle here, but that's only like 5 miles from where I live. I've been by it, but I'm not going to crawl out there on the trestle because people got killed out there a couple of years ago. They got on this trestle with no way off, and a train comes by, and you jump or you're dead.
Right. Yeah. My dad took us because I was on my first trip to Louisville, University of Louisville. We stopped by that bridge. We didn't go like on top of it, but we just looked at it from a distance. And it's definitely not one you want to get trapped on by a train.
But yeah, Kentucky's got all kind of weird stuff. But as much bourbon as they produce here, you'd expect it. Now, I have some friends who live up near, what do they call it? The Red Canyon or in Eastern Kentucky. And they have been on the Travel Channel and some other channels before. They showed me pictures of all the weird footprints they've had up there. Whatever made those footprints, I wouldn't want to run into. I mean, they were big and nasty looking. So there's a bunch of Fortean stuff here. And I think the Cryptid Con was here a couple of years ago down in Frankfurt. I got to go down there and meet Lauren Coleman, who had been one of my idols in that field for many years. I bought all his books, and yeah, there's just so much to be interested in today. You can spend your entire life on any one. And like you said, 10 years ago it would have been a good thing to got into this.
Right. Yeah, no, I remember all the cool stories, but I mean, perhaps a lot of people that might be watching this know you from Ancient Aliens, or at least you've been on it. Like, do you want to tell us how that works? Like, do they have you come in and talk, or do you like?
Okay, well, my friend Okay, sure. My friend Chris Dunn has been on there many times with all of his Egyptian stuff, and he's about the only one that I'll watch on there and believe. Most of the times I watch Ancient Aliens, I turn it on and look at all the neat places they go to and don't listen to any of the stuff that they say. Because as far as aliens go, I think there were ancient aliens, and there are permanent. They've been around forever. I don't think any of them ever built anything. I think every construction you ever see out there, human beings did it. And to say the aliens did it means you have to stop thinking and you don't look into it anymore. But if you look into it like Chris Dunn did and other people, you can start to figure out what kind of civilization it took to make these things. Okay, so Chris got me onto ancient aliens. They sent me a list. We want you to talk about the mica that's been found around the pyramids in Mexico. Were they used for protection against radiation from alien spaceships? Or were they protecting the pyramids when the spaceships landed from the heat? Or what else did the ancient aliens use it for? And I said, first off, I'm not going to dignify any of those questions with any kind of answer. Just forget it. I'm not coming out. They wanted me to fly from Corpus Christi, where I was, out to Denver. And I said, we've already bought the tickets, made the arrangements. So what questions will you answer? And so I gave him some of the questions I would answer, and I refused to use those terms. I know people who've been on the show a lot. If you don't use the terms ancient aliens, they said you'll wind up on the cutting room floor, and the video will be erased. They asked me about mica. So I went and bought a hand-sized piece of mica and took it. And that mica was on the television show that night. There's longer than I was. I mean, they interviewed me for an hour, and I had about 15 seconds on there for the show. And then the funny thing, the day they did that was the day that we killed, that bin Laden was finally wiped out. When it came back there, 10 years ago, or 12 years ago. They took part of that interview and they showed it again this year. They had me talking about cart ruts in Malta, which I speculated on. I have never been there and I don't know, but you can speculate. There's an ice age, a lot of water there. Things are full of water. They freeze. You can slide things easily on them. Big sled, The cart ruts go into the ocean. Obviously, the ocean wasn't there when the cart ruts were made. So, right before the ice age, since the ice age, the water has risen. It covered up what was under there. That's the kind of stuff I answered. And the thing I didn't like was I gave Chris Dunn credit for some of the ideas we talked about, and they cut that out, and they just had me saying, pontificating like I had thought of it. And I don't like that. To me, intellectual property is the most valuable thing that there is. If somebody invented something, they deserve the credit for it. And Chris has been the pioneer in all these things. I mean, millions of people looked at the things in Egypt. Nobody ever thought like Chris did. Flinders Petrie, 100-something years ago, indicated something toward that. But Chris is the one that came up with the details. And he and I were over there together in 2008, and he showed me all these different things. He showed me these things. Okay, Arlan, here are these 100 different flutes coming on the back of this huge statue. They're all perfect. Let me give you any copper tool you want, any kind of pounding stone you want. Can you make those things perfect? No, it can't be. I'm an engineer. I've been in manufacturing. He's an engineer. He's been in manufacturing. You can't do that. No artist, no human hand can do that by itself. It's got to be some kind of guided machine. Now, Chris and I have different ideas about what kind of machines they were, but still. So, Ancient Aliens, I think it's good because they make people think. But when they say, do ancient alien proponents believe this? And the answer is always yes, no matter how stupid it is. Oh, do you think ancient insects populated the Earth? Ancient alien theorists say yes. Well, all the theories they come up with can't all be true because a lot of them are contradictory. So as long as people don't take it seriously, it's fun. But I wouldn't base my life or my income or my stock investments on anything they have to say about that stuff. So that's Ancient Aliens for me. They'll probably never have me on again. But I was kind of hoping that the book there, the Peru book, might get me on there. The latest thing I have out right now is a trilogy, ebooks only from Bain Books. It's called the Thaw trilogy. It's three books: Thaw, Melt, and Flow. FLOE. And they take place 30,000 years from now, after the next ice age. There will be another ice age, and the ice age will wipe out most of the civilizations on Earth, in my book at least. And 30,000 years from now, the world looks a lot different, and there are different cultures and different people. And so I say that the future is not going to be all spaceships, a techno utopia. Mother Nature is going to have a vote about what the future of mankind is going to be.
Absolutely.
And I wrote that, well, you can imagine, and politically, when I wrote something like that, there will be another ice age. The time we're experiencing right now, if you look up Noah's charts from Greenland and from Antarctica, you'll see that what we're in right now is one of the cooler periods. It's been a lot warmer in the past than it has been now. Evidence is, it's always funny to me, I keep reading that people are upset, the glaciers are melting, and all these artifacts are being uncovered up in Norway and Alaska and places like that. We need to do something to protect the artifacts. Yeah, sure. But what does that tell us on the other side? That thousands of years ago, there was no glacier there. There was a village. There were hunters. There were artifacts. There were tools. So what does that mean? Well, thousands of years ago, it was a lot warmer than it is now. And so the last little uptick we have in warming, I'm all for it, because we're overdue for another ice age. And I don't know about you guys, but Kentucky is entirely too far north for me. I didn't take a job one time in Colorado because it snowed too much. I was in North Carolina at the time, and I didn't want to move to Colorado because of snow. New Mexico was cold enough. But anyhow, that's Thaw takes place. It's the adventures of strange people doing strange things in a totally changed world. I mean, my heroes are little guys that are only like 2 feet tall. And they're dark skinned, misogynistic, totally racist, totally primitive. And they go around and travel the world and get their butts kicked, literally, trying to fit in with other civilizations that have been set up. That's what that's about. I'm kind of proud of it. It's fun, and the characters, it came from some stories I had in analog over the years. Had 3 different novellas in analog, and the characters kept saying, we want to tell more stories. And so time I got through, I had 3 books, each one of them about 130,000 words. So I had 500,000 words altogether. And the damn little guys come back to me and they keep saying, oh, more things happen to us before then and after then. You got to write those. Well, someday, if I live long enough. But then I have some other books. You can find me on Amazon of science fiction books. Like I say, I'm not a bestseller or the most famous science fiction writer, but the one thing I take pride in, or at least to myself, everything I've written is totally different than every other thing I've written, except the trilogy. Those are the same characters, but every other book, every other story I've written is totally different. There's too many weird things going on in the world to spend a lot of time on just one. And to me, science fiction is on the spectrum of weird. I mean, that's what I like to read. Actually, science fictional thinking actually helped as a design engineer and manager like I was over the years in different places. Because, well, one of the things I did, you can see back in the back here, this thing called Sigma. Sigma was a science fiction think tank that I put together while I was working at the White House. I was going to a lot of meetings in Washington, D.C. while I was there, and they were talking about government forecasting and forecasting. I said, well, these people are so mundane. They don't talk about stuff. They talk about linear extrapolations. Oh, well, we got this much electricity now. Next year, we're going to need this much in 10 years. I come up, well, what if somebody comes up with something totally new that's going to blow all that out of the water? We don't want 5-year plans like some of our late enemies used to have. And we want Musk and Bezos and Gates and Jobs and these people going out and totally blowing everything away. I mean, who I did as a kid, but I haven't for 40 years, believed that we're going to have spaceships to go to Mars and every place Musk changed that. He blew everything away because he liked science fiction. And so science fiction way of thinking, it helps. I was interviewing for the White House job. A guy named Dr. Bill Phillips, who was a very accomplished man, said, "I see on your resume, Arlan, that you're interested in space travel, human space travel. Why should we spend money in space when we got problems on Earth?" I said, "Well, Dr. Phillips, the reason is right now, all our eggs in one basket called Earth. If there's a plague, a comet impact, or a nuclear war, or something else happens, it could kill everybody. But if we have some of our eggs in other baskets out on the moon and Mars and the asteroids and stuff, there's a chance the human race would survive. I like to think that human race is going to go on for a long time." He said, he said, "Nobody has ever put it to me that way before." He said, "I totally agree with you, and I support that." It took a science fiction fan, writer in the White House to give people those ideas. And I just want to spread that weird way of thinking to all aspects of society. Now, Chris Dunn was an inspiration for me. Like I said, I went to Egypt with him and looked at the stuff he talked about and wrote some things about it. Then I was in Peru for another reason. I won't get into that. That's another long story. But by coincidence or accident, I came across this place called Kiarumiak. This strange looking rock. It's carving. It's about 9 feet wide, 4 feet tall, 2 or 3 feet deep. And so I saw it that day, and I saw a sign for it, and so we were going to see it the next day. So that night in Cusco, Peru, back in 2012, I looked on my computer, and I said, "Well, I want to find out what this is. Surely, so beautiful as that is, somebody's going to tell us." Almost nothing. Almost nothing. Not ignored, whatever. So we went out the next day, and I took this picture and a whole bunch of other pictures are in the book. Became obsessed with it. I sat there for a couple of hours and watched shadows move across it. And I said, "This thing is telling time." Now you can go on Brian Forster's Hidden Ika something channel on YouTube, and you can find the day. This is, I think it's called "Did the Inca Have a Clock?" And you can see me up there talking about it back from 2012. Well, we only had a few hours that day, I couldn't take the measurements of one because there were crowds there, and you're not supposed to climb up on it. So I had Brian go back there a few times over the next few years and take all kind of measurements for me. He wasn't quite as bashful as I was about climbing up there, getting all the measurements. And so he got the measurements, and so I decided to make a 3-dimensional model of it and to find out from that model if I could see what the shadows were doing during the year, since I couldn't be there all year long. I mean, what I would love to have is somebody do a 3D scan of that whole thing and have maybe a webcam out there every day and do all this stuff. But anyhow, long story short, very long story short, I couldn't get an exact 3D model. I got approximate 3D models that I made. I learned to do CAD modeling, 3D CAD modeling enough to show that the shadows show the solstice, the equinoxes, and probably other times of the year. And all a person had to do, if they had been trained in it, was just sit there and watch. And they could, when the shadows were a certain place, the shadow overhead comes down, it points to the side. The shadow comes down from the top. The shadow here comes down from the top. It points over here. There's a hole that's carved into this big rock. And at certain times of the year, the sun shines through that rock. The shadow comes down and points to that. The feet of that sculpture, one goes dark and one goes light. All these things happen within a few minutes. So a person with just that basic training, and the Inca called him a Yanka, the watcher, could sit there, and when he sees these things happen, say, "Okay, boys, it's wintertime." And the first of the year in June 21st or so, it's wintertime. They had a 4-day celebration, which still goes on, by the way. When you're there, I was there, went back in 2017 with my brother, and they have a thing called Inti Relmi. That means the celebration of the sun. 4 days of partying. and parades and noise. It was a fun time to be there. It was great. We sat there and drank a lot of beer and watched these people do all their parades and stuff. It was great. But also, I was there to get the pictures. I got videos of what I was thought. My exciting part for me was my 3D models predicted some things were going to happen, and nobody had ever taken pictures of those. So Brian took some pictures for me, and when I went back in 2017, I videoed it, and I could prove what I had predicted. So I don't know. I'm not an archaeologist. I don't know if anybody has ever done this before, taken an ancient sculpture, made a 3D model of it, and then predicted what it was going to do. But I did. I have since sent a copy of the book to a professional archaeologist at the University of Chicago for his analysis or his comments, but he hasn't answered. He did ask for the book when I told him about it, but no answer yet. I tried to talk to some archaeologists in Peru, and they were not interested at all. I wrote the book, first off, make the claim that I discovered this stuff, analyzed it, but secondly, hopefully to get real people, real archaeologists, real engineers on the site who lived in there to go out there and study this thing. Because the other interesting thing about it is there's nothing like it else anywhere in the world. As far as I've been able to tell, there's been no sundial ever made that did not have a gnomon or a little pointed stick in the middle with a shadow going around it. This one tilts back about 45 degrees, and more than that, actually, it kind of curves, but I couldn't model all that. It's too complicated. But it's a unique thing, and I think it deserves to be on the United Nations World Heritage Site. I would like to see it become a tourist. I'd like to see it become a tourist attraction, because the little village nearby is just dirt poor, and it'd be nice to have a lot of tourism for those people to make some money off of this thing. But as an engineer, I was satisfied. I was happy. I made the model, made some predictions. It worked. The models worked. I got the photographs to prove it. And now I made a lot of speculations in there, and people can identify it. I have facts. These are facts. You can go down and measure it and see it yourself. Here's speculations. I might be wrong. I might be right. I don't know. I just have a feeling that there's a heck of a lot more to it. This shows a level of sophistication that nobody ever thought that the Inca or some previous civilization there had. There's not another one like it in Peru. There's not another one like it in the world that I could find. And I spent several years looking everywhere that I possibly could. So for what it's worth, there it is. And it's like people say, an engineer can't hide his work. You put it out there, and it's there for the world to look at. You can't bury your mistakes like doctors can, or put them in jail like lawyers do. An engineer's work is there for the world to see and criticize.
It's pretty neat. I'd love to be able to travel there and
yeah, no, that was one thing when I was doing some research, and that site just sounded so cool. I'm like, how old do you think it is, like compared to like Egypt or Stonehenge or Göbekli Tepe? Like, where do you think it would fall into?
Well, I tried to figure that out when I was writing the book. That hole in there at a certain time would only shine on that spot over a certain range, but I don't have enough detailed information to the micrometer to predict that. I used the SketchUp program, SketchUp Pro, to make the model, and they allow you to put in time and date and anything else you want. So I ran it back for 3,000 years, and it seems like most of the thing would still work. I don't know, it's that old. Some of the edges are so sharp that it doesn't look like it would be as old. Around Cusco right now, there are a lot of carvings, and some of them are just smoothed over. You can tell over the years they've just been rubbed down, or the rain or something has eroded them. An Inca back in about the year 500 required that a whole bunch of calendars be made, put around the Tiwanaku, the kingdom. And I thought, well, when I read that, I said, well, good, maybe there's some more of these, but nobody's ever reported another one of these anywhere. And as I mentioned in the book, when I first put a picture of this on YouTube, or Facebook rather, back in 2012, people said, oh, it's melted into the stone. No, if you get up here and look at it, you can see 100,000 little chips. It was chipped in place. A few places, almost shovel-like marks, like they had some kind of great big carving thing. I mean, like a great big chisel. It was done by hand. It probably took, I think in the book, I estimated 8 months to a year if you had 3 or 4 people working on it for the volume we had there. Parts of it are very finely finished with sharp edges. The back parts of it are crude. They just hack things out just to get the main features of it are this arc right here determines a shadow. There's a vertical shadow inside here that designates the date. These little marks here are like the marks we used to have on analog watches, the hour hands, hour marks. Those are fine, but when you get up close to it, you see that it's pretty crude in some areas. It was meant to be seen from the stone I took this picture from, like 25 feet away. It was not meant to be seen by thousands of people. There's not any place to stand for thousands of people. Only a couple dozen people probably could jam in the area if you wanted to, if you look at it where it's located. Every year there's a big celebration at this site where thousands of people show up, but it's on the other side of the rocks, a quarter mile away, where there's a lot of land, and they don't even pay attention to this. I don't know why it's been ignored. It's a beautiful thing. What I did in the book, I listed in the book every single reference I could find in archaeological books. And most of them say, well, there's something there. It might be feminine. And somebody said, oh, it's just like a temple over in Egypt somewhere, but they give no reference. Somebody said, oh, it's got 8 different little marks on here. No, there's 7. So that person couldn't even count. And so they looked at it and they had no idea what it was. And so nobody even bothered to analyze it. As far as I know, I'm the first person to analyze it. And parts of my analysis are correct. You can't argue with that. Parts of my analysis could be wrong. I'm an engineer, what's good enough is good enough. Good enough is good enough. We don't try to be perfect with things. But that is a perfect piece of work, as far as I'm concerned. Now, as an engineer, I tried to figure out how in the world did they design this thing to be so sophisticated to all these things. I know they didn't have, at least the Inca didn't have geometry and trigonometry and everything like we do. So how do they do that? My wife heard me griping about this one night. She said, well, I know what I would do. I would make a clay model, a terracotta model of what I wanted. And over the year, I would tweak it until I got the shadows I wanted. And once I got that model done, I would fire it, and have a solid model. Then I would take it up there and take the measurements off that model and put it in the rock. God, my wife's a better engineer than I was. It's a lot easier to correct your mistake in mud than it is
in stone. Yeah.
But anyhow, however they did it, there was some genius. And I'm always of the feeling that we should give ancient geniuses credit. The people who designed that were geniuses. The people who designed those temples in Egypt. The ones who designed the pyramids, for God's sake, they must have been Einsteins and Newtons and multiplied that. I have no concept. I mean, if you guys ever get there, Chris Dunn took me there once, like I said, 2008, and I'm still in awe when I think about it. My God, money, this, and 5,000 years ago at least. That's why I don't want aliens or magicians or something to be that. That's what irritated me so much about the primary writer in our area, which I won't mention his name, but in his latest book, America Before, he said all these ancient megalithic structures were made by psychic powers, not by machines. And I threw the book away. Well, I gave the book away. I don't throw books away, but I gave it away. I didn't want to see it anymore. Now, I admire a lot of his studies in ancient stuff, but that was just total nonsense. Just because you can't explain it doesn't mean it was magic or it was aliens.
Yeah.
Now, I've given talks like this before, and I usually ask the audience, how many of you here could build a World Trade Center from scratch? Do you know how it was built? Could you do it? Yeah, nobody could, not even me. So why do you think your opinion means anything when it comes to the ancient stuff? Obviously, human beings built this World Trade Center, and subhuman beings knocked them down. There were ancient engineers, artisans, fantastic people who did these things. Give them credit. Now, the thing is, once you give credit to human beings, then you can sit down, okay, they're humans, I'm human. Maybe we can figure this out how they did it. But again, like I keep repeating myself, you say it's aliens or it's magic, quit. Your brain is overloaded and you have nowhere to go from there, because we don't have any magicians or aliens or psychics today who can build something like that. I'm a man of.
I'm very much on the same thinking as you. I think Andrew as well.
Absolutely.
So, is there anything we haven't covered here that?
I think I'll give them some questions. I just wanted, because I was listening to one of yours interviews you did, and you talked about how people misunderstand ancient sites and how if people in the future found like certain white porcelain things they might think of. And I just wanted you to talk about that because I thought that was the greatest.
Okay, 2012, my son Sean and I, Dr. Sean Andrews, MD, and Brian Forster was taking us around a place called Tipon in outside of Cusco, Peru. It's at least 500 years old, Inca place that they have like these 5 or 10 acre terraces that step down the side of the hill. And they have waterworks. They have water from underground pipes that are coming in from a mile or 2 miles away and going out and is distributed. And it still works after 500 years. Now, okay, at the bottom of that, we saw a guy come in. He had a headband and had a feather stick in it and a shawl, like an Inca guy. And Brian Forster said, "Watch this." So the guy had a bunch of people with him. He stood up there and he starts chanting at something. I said, "Is that Quechua?" And Brian said, "No, a few of the words are Quechua. He's just making up. This is nonsense he's saying." So these people stood in a line or stood in a circle and all held hands, moved around. Then they got down to one of these sluices where the water is running. I mean, this is coming down from the hills. It's a beautiful area, Tipon, Tipon. Look it up. These people got down on their knees. They were chanting, like praying to this water sluice. I said, "Oh my God." He said, "Yeah, they're worshiping this ancient place." And that's when I turned to Sean and Brian. I said, can you imagine 1,000, 5,000 years from now, somebody find the ruins of one of our water treatment plants and start praying over a sewage disposal place? And I said the same thing when Chris Dunn and I were in the Great Pyramid. I thought we were in there alone, and I heard some chanting, and there were 2 women sitting over there next to a wall next to the sarcophagus, so-called sarcophagus there, the king's chamber, cross-legged, and I told Chris out loud so they could hear it. "Chris, can you imagine 5,000 years from now, people chanting inside an air conditioning vent?" I mean, this is ridiculous. The ancient people had practical means and practical needs. Not everything they did was religious. And not everything was ritual. Sometimes, like Freud said, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Sometimes a water sluice is just to provide water. It's not provide nectar of the gods or something like that. Being an engineer and a non-artist, I looked at the practical side of things. And I just believe that many things in the past were practical. Now, some things are different. I'll admit, you take a cathedral in Europe now that the Templars built or other people built. They're gorgeous and beautiful and everything else. They were built for an esoteric reason to, from what I read at least, to stimulate in the minds of people what heaven would be like. Here's a huge vault and the beautiful stuff and the beautiful singing and echoes and stuff. I don't know if that wouldn't be built for what we would call a practical purpose, but it had the purpose of unifying the neighborhood and strengthening the state and the church and all that kind of thing. So there were other non-physical reasons they were built. So sometimes the ancients did that. Sure, I'm sure they did that. But you look at all the works inside the Great Pyramid. Chris Dunn explains a lot of them. Those were meant to be, I think, used for engineering purposes. Chris's new book, Giza, the Tesla Connection, will probably come out with some very mind-blowing ideas that he's got. The thing is, people can't disprove them. And he's got a bunch of Egyptians interested in those things. So I hope that can be done. Now, my my future work, there's another stone in Peru I'd like to look at. The reason I went there originally, called the Soeti stone. It's a stone about 13 feet length, egg-shaped, and 8 feet wide. It's got 200 carvings on the top of it. And you pour water in it, and the water runs down channels and things. And I became interested in it by seeing a TV program 40 years ago about it. And immediately I saw this thing was a hydraulic model. And so I wrote an article about it, and then that's when I went to Peru to start with. This Kia Romiak thing, we just happened to see a sign as we were driving by. That became my obsession. But the Soeti stone exhibits a lost technology. Anybody can see it. So the reason I think people should study ancient stuff, there might be other lost technologies we haven't found. In the Soeti stone, at the bottom of it, you see the water where the water can come down channels, and you see one area, it looks like this. There are channels that are interlaced with each other. There are flat channels interlaced with each other. It looks like irrigation. Well, it turns out, however old that Soeti stone is, maybe at least 500, maybe thousands of years old, that is the exact replica of a thing called I can't remember the wari wari. Wari wari was a type of irrigation that was used on the other side of the Andes, where it's mostly desert. In the old days, they had these wari wari. They would bring the channels of water down, and they had little raised areas about 6 to 8 inches high, and then they had a channel between them, and they did that for over acres. And what that did, the analysis, it was only rediscovered in like the 1980s. So for 500 years, this technology was lost. The water would be there, and it would generate what they call a microclimate. The water would raise up during the night in the Andes. The sky is black, and the water would raise up. It'd be cold, and that multiplied, made a good environment for raising crops in the middle of the desert. Now, it's used all over the world now, I understand, but it was only rediscovered, the last century. But yet, for centuries, the demonstration of that had been sitting there in that Soeti stone. And so I think, well, that's a good example for all of us. Look at all these ancient technologies. There may be something we can still learn. Perfect example is that Antikythera computer in Greece that they found, that was probably used to predict when the Olympics were going to be. I think that's what they said, but it was probably used for navigation, all kinds of things. So I don't look to the ancients for philosophy or the meaning of the universe or anything like a lot of people do. That's why I won't go pray to a water sluice, but I can admire the people who designed it and try to figure out how they thought. What else were they thinking about? There are a lot of things in Peru yet they still can't figure out how they were made or what they were for. And so you take to me, something like the Great Pyramid, how it was built, I would love to know. But to me, the fact is it was built. That represented more than just a big pile of stones. It represented a mindset. Can you imagine the first guy or gal, the woman that came up with this idea and goes to the council, and pharaohs pitches it, and they say, "What? You want to do what? You want to put 2 million stones the size of this room up there? And are you what for? What are we going to get out of it?" Well, so somebody had to conceive of it. Somebody had to sell it to the powers that be. Somebody had to finance it. You get thousands of people out there, somebody had to figure out the logistics. Okay, we're going to bring all this food and beer in to all these people. We're going to bring the rocks in. Somebody had to design it. There had to be blueprints of some sort. Nobody's ever explained to me yet. I watched a thing today about the ancient civilizations and all the pictures of the pyramid. I just want to know, how did they come to a point coming up 8 sides? How did they come to a point at the top? How come you didn't get up 400 feet and it's tilted? How did you maintain that straight edge? All those straight edges up, all that stuff. Each rock being smaller and smaller and smaller. I mean, you start to think about the organization. To me, that the pyramid is one thing, but there had to be a huge civilization behind it. You didn't have 2 million people living in mud huts coming up with that thing. You had to have a huge organization that supported it, what we call infrastructure to do that. And to me, I talked to Chris Gunn often. I said, "Do you realize, Chris, what you're talking about, this technology, what that represents? Not just the fact it's there, that's fine. But from there, I mean, you take that World Trade Center or that new building they built there. You look at it by itself. If all you ever saw was that by itself, what would you think of it? Well, who the heck built? I mean, 10,000 years now, if you had a story like that, they would try to figure out what kind of civilization built it. Not the thing itself, but what did it take to do that? You had that, the steel, the glass, the design, this. Oh no, it goes on out. I don't know if anybody has ever done a study of what kind of civilization it took to build the Great Pyramid. It wasn't slave drivers. It wasn't a bunch of priests. There had to have been a really sophisticated organization to just to think of it, conceive of it, finance it, support it, and bring all that stuff together and make it perfect like it is. I mean, that's the mind-boggling part about all these things. It's what modern people could actually analyze, because people haven't changed and our thought process haven't changed much. But if you say aliens did it, you forget all that stuff and you won't learn a thing. So
Yeah, no, this has been fun. We only have about
5 minutes left.
6 minutes till this ends. So we'll definitely have to set another one up, because this has been just so much fun. And I think what we'll do is we'll read the book and do a review on it on the channel first, and then come back and sit down and talk about it again. But do you want to tell the audience where they can find you? I know you said a little bit earlier, but just in case they forgot, Amazon and stuff like that.
yeah, Amazon.com carries all the books that I have out. I think somebody has told me Barnes and Noble does too, and maybe some other places. But like I said, I have the trilogy. You can find it on Kindle, the ebooks, but it's on Amazon.com. The Thaw trilogy, also called the Chronicles of Shadowfall, because that's going to be the overall arching thing. There's going to be a bunch more books eventually coming up if I live long enough. The Kia Rubiak book is only available in paperback. Unfortunately, we're not able to get a Kindle version yet. Too many pictures and too much complicated stuff inside of it.
Yeah, I definitely want to check that one out.
Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna check that out.
If you like flash fiction, I got one called Future Flash. It's a small short stories. Like I said, I did a lot of short stories. I have one called Valley of the Shaman. It takes place in a valley in New Mexico. It's really science fiction. Some people say it wasn't, but it's really science fiction. A person's search for the truth about ancient civilizations. One called Silicon Blood, about a rather nasty future of nanotechnology, virtual reality, and 3D printing that shows that not all technologies will always be used for good reasons, you know. And I will be having some other anthologies come out. I've got one right now. Well, we'll see. It's called Paradox Lost. It takes place primarily around the pyramids of Mexico. I'm hoping the publisher will pick that one up. Then I have another one. Every science fiction writer has got to write about the end of the world, so I'm doing that one right now, and it's fun. It's fun to destroy everything. I don't even have a name for that one yet, but writing is fun. Writing helps you maintain your own private insanity in a really insane world.
Absolutely.
Agreed. Yeah, no, me and Andrew for sure gonna be checking out the Kia Rubiak one. We'll make sure to do a review, and I'll do some reviews once I can get to the other ones as well. Just because they all sound so fascinating. Like I want to try to help get the word out. So
I appreciate it.
yeah,
Appreciate that.
no,
Yeah.
we appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come talk with us and
Absolutely.
share
It's
your
been
knowledge.
inspirational,
Yeah.
actually. It makes me want to go out and start traveling and checking things out myself.
Oh yeah, while you're young, guy, do it. 'Cause
Yeah.
I posted on Facebook today. I posted a picture of the Chichen Itza pyramid. I said 40 years ago, on my 43rd birthday, I climbed that El Castillo at Chichen Itza. I probably couldn't do it today. In 2012, at age 72, I was able to climb Ollantaytambo in Peru. 5 years later, couldn't do it. My brother, younger brother, he was only 75. He was able to make it up there. He had COPD and he could make it to the top, but I couldn't do it the second time. Believe it or not, eventually, until we get some kind of rejuvenation shot, which I hope comes up anytime soon, a shot where I can be 25 again. Go do all this shit while you can.
Absolutely.
Stuff while you can, because you won't regret it. I have a friend who's a year older than me, Lee Pennington, and he just posted today he's been to 96 countries. A year older than me, and he and his girlfriend went to Antarctica, for God's sake, Christmas.
Wow.
And he's done 26 documentary films and thousands of talks and stuff. And so, but not everybody can do that. So do it while you're young. You won't regret it. You do regret not doing things.
Mhm.
Right.
If you're careful, you won't regret anything you did do.
Absolutely
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, no, we try to do as much as we can. I know we got a minute 30. But we're just about to head out to New Mexico and do some stuff with Billy the Kid and all that kind of stuff. So we try to get
Well,
out as much as we can.
remember
Billy
what
the
I
Kid from Roswell, buddy.
remember what I said about Roswell. You know,
Yeah.
read what Carl Flock had to say about Roswell.
Yeah, no, we'll make sure to read that book before we head out. And yeah, no, that's been great. Thank you so much. And Arlan, we'll definitely have to set another one up in the future and talk to you some more.
Okay, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
So once again, our team wants to say thank you to Arlan for joining us. This was a fantastic episode, one that we were really looking forward to, and it did not disappoint. This was really quite fun. So we hope you guys listening enjoyed it as well, and hopefully got some cool new books to go check out. Like Arlan said, he's written some fictional and non-fictional books. You got lots of reading material. And we'll have to do some book reviews for them on the channel in the future, as well as have Arlan back, because I feel like we could have talked forever. But until next time, if you want to see more Culz interviews, click that link to your left. For more about what we're doing here at Culz Paranormal, click that link to your right. And don't forget to hit that like and give us a subscribe. And let us know, A, what did you learn from this interview? And B, what book do you plan on reading?